Hello Isaac, this is Mashno, and I've been looking at your game, the game that you sent me. It's a beautiful win. Congratulations for that. I find that in this game you, well, we could say you strangled your opponent. You gave him less and less space, and at a certain point his pieces were so cramped, with so little moving space that he sacrificed this knight on e4, a crazy sacrifice. But well, understandable on the other hand, because he didn't have any chances of getting counterplay without a sacrifice. You write in the message that this was the first time that you played on the first move d4 in a standard rated game, and you ask, do you think I have a good overall strategy? Well, yes, I do. I think that you do understand many things about strategic play. There are also some things that are interesting to look at. For example, the question where to look for play, on which side of the board, and also what to do with the center. Keep it close or open it. Those are strategical decisions that in this game were important, and I find that you made very conscious decisions, and we'll have a look move by move at the game so we can try to understand a bit more what happened. Well, let's have a look. You opened with d4, knight to f6, c4, now e6. So when you play d4, you actually must be prepared to counter, to meet actually different defenses. And this e6, the idea is to play either the Nimzo Indian defense or the Bogo Indian or the Queen's Indian. This can also transpose to a Benoni if he plays c5 and you play d5, or a Queen's Gambit if he plays d5 after this. But in the game, after knight to f3, he played b6, so we get the Queen's Indian set up. You choose to fianchetto your own bishop on g2, like this. This is a very common way of meeting the Queen's Indian. You're actually both fighting for the light squares in the center here. And he gave a check on b4. You play bishop to d2, he takes, you retake with the queen, and here he castles kingside. You develop your knight to c3, and now he makes a strange move. He moves rook to e8. I think this is a mistake. I think that he didn't quite understand the ideas behind the Queen's Indian. What he's trying to do by playing rook to e8 is to prepare the advance of the e-pawn, but that's actually not the pawn that he should be advancing. In this pawn structure that he has now, the most logical idea is either to try to advance the c-pawn or the d-pawn or the f-pawn, because that's the purpose of these two pawns on b6 and e6, to support the advance of one of those pawns. So a more common way of playing this position for black is to play knight to e4 here, with the idea that if you move your queen away to d3, then immediately he plays f5, and with this he's controlling or trying to control, let's say, these central squares and have a strong piece here in the center. That's the theoretical line. If after knight to e4 you take on e4, then he retakes, of course, with the bishop, and after you castle. Now here mostly black doesn't make a decision immediately by playing f5 or d5, but he plays many times d6. It's actually a bit of a waiting move, with the idea of either advancing c5 or later perhaps still d5 or even e5. So those are the let's say the more common lines. The move rook to e8, I think this is not a good plan for black. You castle kingside, he plays h6. I don't think this is a necessary move to play h6. Actually he weakens his king side position. He wants to control g5, but I don't think there was any danger there. Now you move queen to c2. This actually shows that you are moving out of positional understanding, because you understand that it's important to get grip on this e4 square. So by moving your queen to c2, you are preparing e4, the move e4 yourself, and also you are preventing him from playing knight to e4. So this is a very logical idea. Knight to c6. Now you see this knight might come to b4, so you play a3, preventing it, and he plays knight to e7. Well, black is very consistent in his idea. He wants to prepare the advance of the e-pawn, so he thinks I must bring my knight now from e7 to g6 so I can support the advance of the e-pawn. That's what he wants to do. But this whole maneuvering cost him actually so much time that it was actually the wrong plan, let's say, that he chose. Here, this is an important moment, because you want to have a rook on d1, and you play rook f to d1. In this type of positions, it's also always the question which rook to use, rook a to d1 or rook f to d1, and it's not always easy to make this decision, because by moving one of both rooks you actually choose already on what part of the board you are going to play. If you play rook f to d1 like you did in the game, you are actually leaving this other rook on a1, so you are saying I'm not going to play on the king side, I want to play either in the center or on the queen side by advancing b4, or playing perhaps rook a to c1 and then c5 or d5, things like that. If the other rook would go to d1, rook a to d1, you would actually say I want to play in the center or on the king side. So this rook stays on f1 to prepare eventually later f5, f4, I mean, f4, or e4, f4 and f5, things like that. So this is actually an important moment where you have to make a decision on which side of the board do I want to play. Rook f to d1. I think it's a correct idea, because this is the side of the board where you have more space. Later playing b4 and c5 can be interesting. He continues with knight to g6, and now you play the move e4, controlling the center completely, and black must do something against that. He plays here the move that he prepared for such a long time, the move e5, and again white has an important decision to make here. The question is, what is better for white, to open the center or to keep it closed? I understand with your decision, you kept the position closed, and by playing d5 here, so as a result of this you gain a space. You do give away the control over c5 now, but I think that d5 is a good idea in the sense you win space, and you also frustrate your opponent a bit, because his rook on e8 looks now very stupid, looking at its own pawn there. So in fact this is a very practical way of actually showing that you understand more the position than your opponent. Still, it's very interesting to look at what would have happened if you take on e5 and open the center completely. I found an interesting variation that I want to show you. It looks a bit risky, but it's really interesting to take on e5 with knight. Knight takes e5. After this, black takes, white takes again, and now rook takes e5. The idea, and that's why I mentioned that it's a bit risky, is to advance the f-pawn, f4. Now this looks a bit dangerous because we open the defense of our own king here, so it becomes a bit vulnerable. But remember, he doesn't have a dark square bishop to use this diagonal yet. The rook is forced now to move to e8, And now we can advance one more time with the pawn e4 to e5. Yes, we do allow black to trade the bishops, but after trading bishops, bishop takes g2, king takes g2. Now have a look at this knight on f6. The knight on f6 doesn't have a good place to go now. If he goes to h7, then actually he's completely out of play. Well, it could be rerouted to f8 and then to e6, but that would give you time, because that cost him time. Could give you time to, your knight could go to d5 or to e4, things like that. And if this knight goes to g4, then he threatens, of course, a fork on e3. So queen to e2 is very strong, attacking the knight. The knight doesn't have any place to go, so he must be defended, and then after h3 we at least win a pawn, because the knight must go to h6, and then h5 falls. So this could be the consequence of opening the center, and it's very interesting to see if this position is much better for white or not. We do have more space. The counterpart is that the king might be unsafe, but there's not really a good attacking chance for black. I mean, moves like g4 are very risky for black himself, because then the queen to f5, for example, could come in, things like that. And we could try to double up rooks on the d file for white. Let's say he continued with knight to f8 to reroute this knight, and rook a to d1. Already knight to e6 is impossible, because then e7 would fall. So black is actually in trouble here. It's all his pieces of the back rank. We control the complete center. The knight can go to e4 or to d5. So this would have been hopeful for white. It's not easy to find these long variations. We need to calculate and to evaluate, and in that sense I'll go back to the position in the game now after e5. So here, in that sense, I understand that it's more clear to play d5 here and keep everything under control. Let's continue how the game. Let's see how the game continued now, because it's interesting that actually the main theme in this game is space advantage. That's actually what you used to win the game. d6. Here you move a rook to d2. When I saw this move, I thought, what does he want to do with this rook? And you have a very creative plan. The creative plan is to move your knight to d1, then to e3 to control f5. Very smart idea. I wonder if you wanted to do this with the idea of bringing really your knight to f5, or is it the idea to stay with your knight on e3 to prevent black's f5? Well, only you know this answer to this question. On a higher level of chess, we don't ask only what we want to achieve. We always ask, if I would play with my opponent's pieces, where would I like to have counterplay? And in this case, because of this pawn formation of black, this pawn chain, this indicates, I don't know if you have heard of this. I'll explain to you. It's called the arrow principle. At least that's how I call it. The arrow principle means that the pawn structure of a fixed pawn chain is like an arrow that points, in this case, towards the king side. So that means that black's counterplay should be found on the king side, for example by advancing f5 later. If we look at white's pawn chain, these two, we also see an arrow towards this side. So that means that the strategical plan is to advance the queenside pawns here. Why not advancing the kingside pawns? Well, imagine that you later would advance the f pawn, then after taking e takes, then already we would have a weakness here on e4. So this is the arrow principle. when the pawns are fixed like this, the part of the board where the arrow is pointing at, that's the part of the board where we should try to find counterplay. So that's why I ask you this question, that if your plan was to stay on e3 to prevent him from his own counterplay, then it would mean you really have gained important insight on preventing counterplay. Another idea, instead of playing this, would be to play immediately before, by the way. So because of this arrow principle, play before and c5. And let's say that black plays the same idea that he did in the game, bishop c8, and then you play c5. This is temporary pawn sacrifice, because you get it back immediately after knight to a4. You get this pawn back, and the pawn on c7 will stay weak. So this is a better position for white, I think. The difference with what happened in the game you also switched to this before and c5 idea, is that now we have a piece more here on the queen side. The knight is on a4 instead of e3. Now it's also important and interesting to see what happened in the game, because we see in the game that you use your knight to go to e3. Here first you play h3, and yes, I do understand that, because if you play knight to e3 immediately, then the black knight comes to g4 and is more or less forcing to trade this knight. So what you do is you play h3 first, and queen to c8 is played, attacking h3, so you go with your king to h2, almost forced, I would think. And here he moves his rook to f8. Well, most probably he realizes that the only way of getting some counterplay is to play f5 later. So he needs to move this knight away from f6 and then play f5. That would have been the most healthy thing to try for black, I think. Or try to prevent your idea of playing before by, for example, playing a5 himself. In the game, knight to e3 now followed, and here he didn't play a5, he played knight to e7, and I think that's also a mistake. I think that he, if he would be consistent, he would try to start this f5 idea, but it's not easy to achieve it. Well, perhaps it is a preparation to play knight to e7 as he does, then later go away with his knights and then play f5. It's not easy for black to get to this plan of f5. He needs so many moves. Now you play b4. So in fact we can say that your knight on e3 is now controlling this f5 square, so you can play b4. Here your opponent did something very strange. He went back with his knight to g6. Actually, if he would have been consistent in his plan, he would have moved now knight to h7. New variation. Knight to h7 with the idea of preparing f5. And this would have been a very exciting fight, because you play here c5, and then he continues with his own plan of playing f5. Here, now this would have been very exciting, because here you have the choice again with white. Do you want to take on f5, or do you play c6 like you did in the game? c6 looks very strong, because this bishop must go now to e8. And now perhaps taking on f5 is interesting. Let's have a look. Knight takes f5, knight takes f5, pawn takes f5, queen takes f5. What do we have here? It's interesting how the endgame would be after queen trades, because after we trade queens here, well, we have our pawns on light squares. He has a light square bishop, but this bishop is not very active. He has a strong pawn here on e5. It's interesting. I think that with secure play by black, he can activate his other rook and bring it to the f file, perhaps. Perhaps bishop to h5 and rook a8 to f8 could be a good idea for him, and then activating also his knight, perhaps to f6 and then to e4, things like that. It's interesting. This would have been let's say the correct plan for black, to prepare f5, and he didn't do it. He missed this this logical idea, and he actually gave you a tempo, actually more time, because he went back again with his knight to g6. You understood very well that your chances are here on the queen side now, playing c5. And at this point your opponent made a very big mistake by advancing this pawn to b5. This actually, I find this was the decisive mistake. If you would have played b takes c5, then you take again, he takes with the d pawn, and then you play knight to c4. You cannot take here immediately on c5, because then knight takes e4, so you have to play something like knight to c4. His pawns are still weak, so one or two of these pawns will fall. That's my feeling. And you have a better position here, you have more space. His pieces are not very well placed, so I think this is better for you still. But the difference with the game is that in the game you got a wonderful position after his move b5. He tries to keep everything closed, but now c6 is an excellent move, forcing this bishop to go to e8. Now you have huge advantage. His pieces are completely cramped. He has no way to go, nowhere to go, no good plan to make. This is just hopeless now. Now he misses this bishop on this diagonal towards f5, so the idea of knight to h7 and f5 is not good enough, because now knight takes f5. He doesn't have this bishop. You continued here with queen to d3. You attack his pawn on b5. He defends it, and now actually everything comes together now, because your rook that you placed on d2 now has a function as well. Rook d to a2. I suppose that you didn't plan this when you played rook to d2. You didn't plan that you wanted to go with the rook to a2. Perhaps you did. In that case, you were thinking really in strategical ideas on long term. But many times these things happen, that we have a rook already on d2, so we think, hey, wait a minute, if I advance my b pawn later, then I can play rook to a2. And this is very strong, because you prepare the advance of your a pawn now. You advance now with a5, and you advance a4. So you calculated this very well, the consequences of each take. He takes on b4, you take on b5, it trades queens, so now you have control over the a file. You have this weakness of black, and you have the potential of advancing the b pawn here after being supported. And his pieces are just so passive there on this last rank, and it's actually very understandable here that your opponent chose to try something wild, because if he goes slow he will be beaten really little by little. Your advantage will become bigger. So he decided to sacrifice here on e4. Perhaps with black many people would do this, because at least it gives black some idea of counterplay. It's not enough, but it looks at first sight a bit dangerous. Now here, and this is also a very important moment, and I must say that your move knight to f1 is a solid defensive move. Actually, you understand here that if you defend very solid this position, then you will win later with your own plan of advancing your pawn on the b file and using the a file with the rook. There is also a way of forcing the win by playing b6 immediately, but it's something that I can understand, that if you are in this game behind the board and perhaps your time is going down a bit, that you think, wait a minute, it's better to defend first. But I want to show you the variation, because it's beautiful to see the move b6, if he takes the knight on e3, then you play b7, attacking the queen. You see, and if the queen goes to b8, it's actually the only place where it can go, where it prevents this this promotion. Then rook to a8 is winning. It wins the queen. So that means that after b6, he cannot take on e3. So he could take on b6, and now you can move your knight away to c4, because now black has two weaknesses here, on b6 and on d6. And well, the threat of taking here on g3 is not very much. You simply retake with the pawn and everything's safe here on the king side. Let's say he plays bishop to f7 to attack your pawn on d5. Then we need to defend that pawn, so we move away the knight from f3 to d2, so the bishop defends this this pawn. If he takes on g3, we take back, and he could try to attack it one more time, but then d6 is going to fall anyway. And here actually it falls with attack on the queen, so the queen must move to d8, for example, and now we can trade this this attacker on f7. And after rook takes, we have this doubled pass pawns. The b6 pawn is weak, and the king is safe behind these pawns and this bishop, so there is nothing to worry about. So, well, this to show you, let's say, the most aggressive way of winning this position. What you did is also correct, to play simply knight to f1. It's a decision that is very well, very safe, and it's correct. After he takes on f3, f takes, bishop f7, knight to e3, defending, knight e7, attacking one more time, and now he misses this this small tactics that you saw very well, that you can take here on e5, because the knight on e7 is undefended. So after retaking, queen takes e7, and now your position is completely won here. You have a huge advantage. Bishop to g6, check, also a very good decision. You have advantage, so trading the heavy pieces brings the victory closer. After taking, you have now a dangerous e pawn. He has a weak c7 pawn, and your b pawn and your c pawn are very strong as well. He advances this pawn, knight to d5, attacking the c7. He advances here, and you take this e3 pawn, bishop to d3. You defend your own b pawn, rook to b8, attacking it one more time, knight to d5, attacking the c7 pawn. Here he played bishop to f5. You took on c7. The king comes closer, and here this is the point where you say that, well, that e7 check is a mistake because you actually give away a pawn, but it's not a very serious mistake actually. It's because the position is still won after this. There is of course rook to f2 would have been a very strong move, because you pin this bishop. Let's have a short look. If you play here this, then he must defend it, and then you can play g4, winning this bishop. Of course it wins easily, but after e7 you still have a one position. So this kind of mistakes, don't worry about it, because it's just a slight mistake, because these two pawns are so strong, and you are a piece up anyway. So even if one of these pawns would fall, still the position would be won for you. Even if you would lose one of these pieces, these two pieces, still you would have the best chances with two connected pass pawns. So I think that this is simply anyway winning. You advance the two pawns, he goes to c8 with the bishop, and then you advance again. He has to give this bishop, he goes with the rook to c8, and now rook to b8 is actually killing, because after trading this rook, you see bishop to f1 followed by bishop to a6 is going to promote and win. So, well, what can we say about the whole game? What I see is that you do understand very well the strategical ideas. You make well use of space advantage. There are certain moments of important decisions. That is actually this rook move, rook f to d1 or rook a to d1, that's an important moment. Another moment is the moment that you close the center by playing d4 to d5 instead of opening it. Both were good decisions, keeping the center closed or opening it. To open it, you need to calculate and to have a clear mind to make those calculations and see that it brings you advantage. And keeping the center closed and winning some space is, let's say, a more safe way of playing this strategical plan. Your opponent missed the main idea, what I call the arrow principle, to advance his f-pawn, play f7, f5. And that was actually why he lost the game. He didn't understand actually the Queen's Indian defense. He plays it, but he doesn't really understand where he must try to get counterplay. He was trying to advance his e-pawn first, and you made use actually of his lack of understanding, and you showed that you understood the position better than he did. So once more, congratulations with this win. I think it is a good choice to play d4 on the first move here, because you do understand this strategical points of space advantage, close positions, and maneuvering towards to position your pieces better. So I think that d4 can bring you lots of joy and success in this type of games. When you switch, I don't know if perhaps you played e4, I don't know, but when you switch from e4 to d4, it's on one side it's very instructive, because you get different types of positions, so that forces you to learn more and also to study more, because you have to be prepared to meet different defenses with black. The King's Indian, the Benoni, and the Queen's Gambit perhaps. So you need to have a look at those defenses. So you have, let's say, a main variation against each of them. That's the best. But I know learning openings is not something very easy, because we need to practice them also a lot. What I mostly do is, when I play a game, I review it and I keep track on what part of the game I left the theory. So I grab a opening book or the database, and I look, okay, on what point I move something different than the theoretical lines, and then I try to have a look at those theoretical lines and what the ideas are behind them. You don't need to memorize theoretical lines. That's actually the wrong approach to learn openings. Many young players do that. They memorize them without understanding the ideas behind them, and well, perhaps that's what happens to your opponent here. He didn't understand the ideas of the position where he could have looked for counterplay with black. Alright, well, I wish you lots of success. If you have any question about this game, you can send me an email, I'll answer you. And if you have more games that you would like me to look at, well, we can follow the same procedure. You can send me a donation of €10 and send me the game, and I'll make a video for you. Alright, best wishes and have a good time. Goodbye.